Hello and welcome everyone to the latest in the IWFM Turbulent Times webinar series, this time hosted by the IWFM London region. I'm Cathy Hayward, I'm the chair of the London region, deputy chair of Members Council and also the founder of Magenta Associates, the workplace communication experts. Today we have an interview with an FM professional in the capital. This is the second in a series of interviews with leading FMs about their career so far and what their current job involves, including how they're reacting to the current COVID crisis. The session is going to last about 45 minutes or so. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along on the panel on the side of your screen, and I'll put them to our interviewee. So today I'm speaking to Brian Reeves, who is Head of Facilities Management at the Design Museum, the world's leading museum devoted to contemporary design in every form, and it's based in Kensington. He's been there for about 4 years and has a more than 19-year career in FM. He's led in-house teams, he's managed agent portfolios and outsourced supply teams. He's delivered capital regeneration projects on both behalf of private investors and managing agents and worked in the public sector. And he's also performed a category specialist role for in-house private occupiers, PFIs and public institutions. Brian is speaking inside the Design Museum in the archive room, and he'll give us a little tour of that in a moment. I thought it might be his study at home, but it's not. So welcome to you, Brian.
Good afternoon, thank you.
Right, so to kickstart us, perhaps you could describe what your day-to-day role for the Design Museum involves, perhaps in more normal pre-COVID times, and then we'll come on to talk about the current crisis in a minute.
Yeah, yeah, of course, thank you. So very similar to probably most FMs, and people's day starts with coffee or a tea. But then what we tend to do is, for me, it's always important to walk the building. I think that was always key, regardless of your role within the structure of the FM department. Walking the building is important. You know, you can't be seeing things. Also understanding outside. This is one thing in my early career I would often forget to do, but checking the weather, understanding what impact that has. I will come on touch on this a bit later with the museum, but understanding the weather and the part that plays. Life safety plant, checking to make sure, because it's unique here in that we have a lot of public as well as staff coming here. And then the rest of the day would involve answering emails, meetings, etc., and then pretty much run the same as anybody else's day.
Okay, cool, thank you. So I think it'd be really interesting to understand a lot of IWFM members and people attending today will come from a corporate office background. So can you help us to understand the complexities of managing a museum and all those exhibits, and how that might differ from the more traditional FM provision in office spaces?
Yeah, thank you. Good question, Cathy. The role of an FM department in the museum shares probably a lot of similarities that a traditional FM would have, but the weighting of some services is greater in some areas, such as environmental conditions and public safety, where in a typical office block you wouldn't engage in active profiling techniques of your staff, but whereas in the museum we do. In regard to, so before the pandemic, one of the key things that we had to balance was obviously the terrorist threat and working very closely with the Metropolitan Police, something that you wouldn't ordinarily come across in a administration building. Also, in terms of the space, and it's how we manage the space. And as you said at the start, I've been very fortunate, and I consciously sort of set out to get experience in all the different sectors of facilities management. Here at the museum, it was key to understand the flow of the public. How we grade our space was a key point to understand the apportionment of our operating funds. Obviously, the Design Museum is different to a lot of the big UK national museums. We're not funded by the government. In fact, less than 2% of our total revenue comes from government funds. Most of our revenue here comes from commercial activity and selling tickets. So it was important to understand that where the revenue generating areas were and sat, to just attract sort of a large percentage of our operating budget, rather than say necessarily a back of house corridor. Whereas in large office buildings that I've managed in the past, you wouldn't distinguish one corridor to the next. They would just sort of generally blend to be the same. Obviously, events now are a norm for a lot of large museums. These bring its own challenges in terms of adding flexibility to spaces. A lot of what we do here, you have to add in that additional degree of flexibility. So when we have events and large corporate events, which unfortunately this year have fallen away, obviously because of obvious reasons, but in previous years, it's understanding that we have to transform the building from a museum that's set out for public engagement into one that's set up for a party. So it's ensuring that flexibility is built into everything that we do. And probably another notable difference, I mean, there's quite a few I could go into, but it's one not a lot of FMs come across, is the adage of children. You know, and so all of those out there who have public spaces will understand the complexity that that brings. They have a unique way of testing the built environment in ways that adults certainly do.
That's a nice way of putting it, I think.
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully that's yeah, that's a kind of gives you a flavour.
That's brilliant. So let's wind right back to go back to the kind of the start of your career. You've been in FM since you were 26. How and where did the FM journey begin for you?
Right. Okay. So I'm yeah. So quite a long time ago. This is almost 22 years now for me. So I think the thing that attracted me to FM in the first place was the variation in the challenges and the breadth of the businesses that you have a touch point with. So my formal education was in the arts. When my journey along this career path changed, I started working initially for a tech company in the late 90s. This company was the first in the text marketing sector. This was before emails were commonplace. In fact, it was more often than not in the early days that suppliers didn't actually have an email address. I quite often had the conversation, which was, oh, you don't have an email address, or you don't have a website? So I pursued this career because I think FM, for me, you do a lot of different type of roles. You can come across legal challenges, financial challenges, the physical strategy. You have to engage in strategy, sales and marketing. Projects are always quite interesting because that incorporates a lot of those components. Health and safety, and that being one of the early catalysts for the acceleration of the FM marketplace. Energy management, which is I think more important now than before. And also embracing, and this is a softer power element of FM, is embracing social change and how the workplace supports and it meets the needs of the new generations, people who are coming into the workplace. Just to kind of frame this for you, if you can try and picture what the workplace looked like 20 years ago or even 10 years ago and compare it today, so that the demands of the workplace changed, and this quite often reflects society change and how connected people are. This is one of the, and in FM, where a lot of other business functions and parking things like marketing, etc., and IT to the side, a lot of the other functions remain traditionally the same, but with FM you have to grow and develop, and it's been a very exciting sort of travelator conveyor belt as we've moved along with the business change, and it's something that I've found, you know, paid back my faith in coming into this arena. I mean, for example, it's today the sort of where often in the past work would be the creep into your personal life, it's kind of reflected the other way. So yeah, for me, FM, it still has a creative element. There's a creative piece to it, and it's really the people contact for me.
Okay, that sounds really cool. So what would you say, with your kind of 22 years experience in the sector, what are the most important things that an FM has to kind of have or say or do to kind of effectively climb the career ladder?
So for me, I don't want this to sound like a sound bite in any way, but it starts and ends with people. Just to give you a bit of framework around this, people bring life and they breathe life into the built environment, and very much the FM role is an output role. So my advice to somebody who wants to move on in FM, the key thing is really just to understand that FM it's an output role. All results are evident at all times, and they can be seen at all times in all the different guises, be it from the lighting to the flooring to the air conditioning, this sort of thing. Everything that we do. I went to and it's understanding that what we do in our industry, we're sort of we make the world tick. I was at a seminar and somebody was explaining the design and how design worked, and they forgot to add, and it's important for me, and why I'm saying this in context of this question is there's the final part, which is people dream things, they design it, they deliver it, and then we help to maintain it, and it's maintaining those things. So for me, it's understanding that that's the key output. I think it's important to listen to complaints as an opportunity. Sometimes it's difficult to really adopt and consume complaints because they can feel sometimes that your efforts aren't always appreciated. But as an FM, I'd say, as you're moving through your career, try not to lose the appetite to listen to what people are telling you. It gives you the opportunity to improve, not just through your eyes, but through the eyes of the end user. And that's the key thing. What we do is it's very much, it's not selfless, because we have jobs and we have ambitions, but it helps deliver that environment to people who have their own goals which they want to achieve. Equally as important, I would say, is as the end user, is your supply network. I can't put, I mean, there's a lot of emphasis, and I want to put a lot of importance on building and working with your supply network. None of what we do collectively as an industry can be done without your support network. And finding organizations, just to name a few, such as Julius Rutherford, who focus on excellence in their field of expertise and don't necessarily focus on the management piece or the contract, is really important. As organizations can quite often, and through my career in the last 20 years, I've seen small organizations grow to billion-dollar companies, and I think it's easy sometimes to lose the message and lose the core reason why you started. So for me, it's important. So just to recap, just to remember, it's people. People are the key reason why we do it. They're the people who, when you get positive feedback and you've helped somebody achieve something, when you go home, that's the thing that will make you feel better. So remember the people piece, and remember your network. We can't do this on our own.
I think that the people piece, the people piece reminds me of back when I was a journalist. I used to do sort of, case studies of fantastic new facilities, and if you got images from the architects, it would always be just beautiful pictures, but with no people in it. But if you got pictures from the facilities management company, it would be pictures with people in it, because that's, we see people using buildings. We're not just designing buildings to look beautiful. It's to have them used to help people be more productive. So I think that's a really key point. So on your LinkedIn profile, you said that you consciously set out to gain experience in each of the kind of core property disciplines, and that's obviously included for you working both supply side and client side. What have you enjoyed the most, do you think?
I think for me, and I can't put enough importance, I think this seems to be a catchphrase on this webinar. So for me, I can't put enough importance about the self and understanding how you're connected to the workplace. So for me, being connected to the creative roles have really worked well for me. Businesses have a persona, and quite often they have a bit of a challenge. They have a dual personality. Some may be a creative business, some may be a tech type business, but they kind of can sometimes have a clash. But for me, things like working at CBRE and Land Securities Trillium gave me the technical skills and the knowledge of the industry and a firm base to deliver the FM service in all of the different companies that I've worked for. But for me, it's finding an organization that has a persona that matches yours. This is vital. If you find that you ever have to check yourself in at the door when you walk into the office, my advice is you're probably doing somebody else's job, and you should spend your time to find the one that fits you best. In saying that, because I think you will get more out of it yourself, and you'll deliver more. And I think the end result, going back to the previous question, you'll be able to serve the people and your end users much better. So for me, you know, developing, so I worked for a company called Nido through Roundhill Capital, and it was developing a high-end student accommodation brand. For me, that was a huge amount of fun. The 14-hour days whizzed by; it barely felt like work. But for me, and for me, it was really it was the social interaction at EMI Records that was more akin to my personal life, and I felt that that was a better match for me.
Okay, I like that idea of like, you just don't check yourself in at the door. If you are checking yourself in the door, something's kind of going a bit wrong.
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah.
So finding an organisation whose values, I guess, kind of match your own is really key, isn't it? But so I had a bit of a LinkedIn stalk of you, and you've had some amazing career highlights that anyone would be proud of. So you've talked about mobilising new teams and regenerating existing teams. You delivered huge projects. So you've had a 1.3 million government security tech program, a common-space design and build branding project in Liverpool Street. You've procured multi-million-pound IT professional services and FM contracts, reduced operating costs, lease rationalisation projects, streamlining supply chains. I think the particular one you talked about was at CBRE, where you rationalised the supplier base from 117 to 8 within 6 months, which sounds quite intense time. Out of all of those, and maybe there are some that I haven't mentioned, what would you describe as your real career highlight, something that you're really proud of? And of course, your career highlight might come next, you just don't know. But to date, what's your career highlight?
You know, this is a great question, Kathy, and probably the hardest to answer. I mean, I think for me, some of the people I've worked with, you know, taking for example the CBRE rationalisation, working with some incredibly talented people, Keith Shields, who now runs his own business, Pelco, up in the northeast. Peter Barton, who worked at CBRE at the time, had this incredible vision of how the FM structure would look, you know, and working with those guys was absolutely exceptional. You know, I've been very lucky to work with the procurement team at EMI, Mike Merlees, a phenomenal leader, and you tend to sort of adopt these personalities, and not to mention the ever so likable Mr. Neil Burton, who I worked with in Liverpool Street. But personally, I think what happens in facilities is, I want to just explain that facilities will take you into areas which, when you start out in your career, I think sometimes can seem somewhat surreal. You know, a great example would be, I was sitting at my desk at CBRE, and there my role was to look after London and the South East, and in a managing agent operation role. And one of the senior directors came over and asked if I would pop down to Millbank. There was they were having some problems down there, and I wondered whether or not I could pop down and help out. Now, as I was leaving Paternoster Square, leaving the building, I happened to catch a glimpse on the TV that they happened to they'd invaded the building. Having already agreed, I would go down and help out, thinking it might have been something to do with the heating or something to do something soft services orientated. I thought, oh right, okay, no backing down now. So interestingly, the long walk down to Millbank, because they'd closed the stations, I was the only person in a suit, only person wearing a tie heading in, trying to find a way in. Obviously I got to the front of Millbank. There was no way in there, you know. I mean, it was the police cordon, I couldn't get through, so I had to find my way in through the back, and eventually found the management team in the office. I mean, so it's things like that was kind of like, not necessarily that's a career highlight, but I'm just trying to explain that, you know, facilities management will take you on the most amazing journey, you know, that I think any career for me personally, you know, I can think about things like, for example, pushing the boundaries of what was physically possible with Wi-Fi, you know, where Wi-Fi now compared to what it was 5 years ago is exceptionally different. And working with the International Wi-Fi Committee, and yes, folks, there is an International Wi-Fi Committee, and you have to get their approval if you want to use their logo. Being FM Finalist of the Year was a great highlight. Winning an Innovation Award, which was great. There's some great committees and organisations that help promote the Young FM of the Year award, something I was involved in. Obviously, the person who was on the first webinar, Jason, was involved with the Young FM of the Year award. Installing and things like that, all the way through to installing professional grade mastering suites for Deluxe. Deluxe are the people who do the versioning and do the grading and colouring for a lot of Hollywood films, through to racing through a £3.2 million capital project in 4 months. That was super exciting, I have to say. I've never heard so much swearing in a room since or before. And all the way through to things like my FM career, I found myself in the room where they burn the DVDs for the Oscar judges. This is going to get a fabled room. I can't tell you where it is, but it was through my career and working for Deluxe that I ended up in this room. And so there are some particular highlights, but I think the one thing that shines for me, and if anybody asks, for me the most important thing is when I was looking after the Met Police headquarters, and we had quite a simple problem to solve, but the outcome was quite different. So we did a bit of a team restructure on the soft services, but rather than using the money that we saved to put on the bottom line, I wrote to the directors and asked that I could use that to feed back into the team. And so what we did, for me, and it was all about the communication and people and contacting and making that connection with people is really important. So for me, what we did is we started evening classes for all the people who were ESOP. So for those who don't know, English speakers of other languages, where English isn't your first language. And what it was important, and it was giving something back. So we'd made the change. The performance of the team was better, but for me, it was important that we helped people not just in work, but outside of their working lives. People who didn't have a particularly good grasp of English, and we didn't focus the English lessons. And we had two. One was a Tuesday and a Thursday, so for absolute beginners and for people who had a reasonable grasp. But for me, it was important that we could give something back, so that in an emergency situation, if somebody can't communicate or speak English or take directions from the emergency services, could we keep them safe, and how could we improve their life beyond work? So we started these English lessons, and that's the one thing that I'll always take with me, and I take great pride in, because it was not just win-win. I feel like it was a triple win. It was win, win, win. The Met Police got a better service. And the people attending the lesson could improve their lives inside and outside of work. And for me, it just gave that great sense of delivering something that was just beyond the day-to-day.
That's brilliant. I think you talk very eloquently about FM as a career and where it can take you. Going back to your Millbank story, are you at all wary now when someone says, "Oh, could you just pop down there to check out something for us?" Do you always think, "Oh God, is it going to be another Millbank?"
Well, I now tend to ask before I agree to something. I always ask, "Oh, so tell me a little bit about what needs to be done."
Yeah.
In my early days, I was. Yeah,
you
I was
know
always
whether
happy
to bring your riot shield or not.
Whatever it is. Yeah, well, I think most of the students found it surreal that I was there just walking around in this pinstripe suit, with a tie on, and I thought they probably felt it was quite surreal, so probably left me alone, which is very fortunate.
Lucky for you.
Yeah, always. I think, what's that old saying? Is always look before you leap. I think I forgot that one. So,
Well, it makes for a good story though. So, but bringing us back up to the present day, the Design Museum has recently partially reopened following lockdown. When we were talking earlier this week, I thought it was really fascinating that you talked about adopting a kind of adult-centric approach to social distancing. So can you tell me a little bit about the reopening process and how your teams have adapted to the pandemic?
Yeah, certainly. So for the FM team, for me and the team here, our part in the reopening was to provide an environment in which our visitors could achieve the, and I think this is a new thing, but it achieved the hands-face space. Obviously, in the early stage of the pandemic, there was very little guidance coming from central government. What we did is we initially set out with a healthy dose of common sense. I think that's something a lot of FMs have and you need to survive. But I'm pleased to say that we weren't a million miles away from what the government advice was when it finally came out. And for us, it was about reducing the circumstances in which the virus could transmit. That was the first priority for us. Looking at common touch points, that was something that we were able to change quickly. It was also important to note that any changes that we made needed to be effective, but also balanced in that they had to be temporary. At the time, nobody knew how long the pandemic was going to last, how widespread it was going to be, etc. So keeping an eye on costs and being able to reverse change was really important at the time. We looked around at what was available to us, our resources and our skills that we had in the team. And it was through mining these skills and engaging with people that we were able to come up with a solution. The solution, it feels a little bit like an old Labour expression, but it was about communication, not education. But I suppose that's the same thing in that communicating in person to people, communicating to staff, visitors, stakeholders, communicating to visitors ahead of time and in writing, and working closely with some of my other department heads, in particular working with the head of retail, a guy called Duncan Sanders. We worked very closely through that, and Matteo Precesi, who's the head of marketing, how we were getting the message out to people. We needed to understand that the government spent months telling people to stay away from each other. But our business is very much about bringing people together, and we needed to do that in a way that gave people the comfort and the safety and the knowledge that they could do it safely. And it was through these discussions and working with the guys that quite early on we recognized that what I like to call the social contract between people was key. And if we could capture this social contract and promote this through both the layout of the building and also the signage, we could maintain the adult to adult relationship. Which I find you always get better results as opposed to having to rely on instruction and watching and policing people. We never felt that our role was to, and it was a question, a question that came up quite early, as what would we do if people weren't, would we eject people? Did we need more security? Would we be patrolling the halls of the museum and throwing people out if they didn't put on their face masks? But we felt that we didn't need, we could just adopt the message that was being given to people in their social lives. They had a journey that they made on their way to the museum, and it was just promoting that. And as I said, it's about engaging people so they had that adult to adult relationship and avoiding adult to child communication.
And have you had many problems with people not following the rules?
I'm pleased to say only a handful. Okay. Our VE team are very good at communicating the reasons and the purposes behind it. We simply make it very clear that that if there's no face covering, then you can't come in. I think people understand that the DCMS set out very clear guidelines, and the government also very clear that if you want to be open and you want to continue to have a viable business, there's certain rules that you need to work to. And it was ensuring that the communication that we gave to people was, it's not just because we're telling you to, it's something that we ask you to do on behalf of other people. And I think if people have recognized that if you want, treat others as you wish to be treated by yourself, I think is the expression. And that if you would want people to be courteous to you and wear the face mask, we found that people readily adopted it. And so really is a very tiny percentage of people that question why we were doing it, but very quickly they understood that if they wanted to come in and see this amazing show about electronic music, then you have to put on a face covering, and keep distance. You know, I mean, we worked with some fantastic designers, because the show that we had, it's quite interesting that the show we had, which was ready to go, and we were excuse me, 2 weeks away from opening a new exhibition about electronic dance music, before the call came from the government that everybody had to close. You know, we had these challenges. What did we need to do? And it was about adapting the layout of the show and how we messaged social distancing, what we could do to put in place to help support and give people the comfort that we were looking out for them. For example, it wasn't about, and for us it was of paramount importance that we didn't put profitability before safety, and it was really refreshing that we were backed by the organization here, in that we went from 120, which would have been our hourly total capacity, we literally halved it. We were happy to halve it. There were things, yeah, you know, and there are things that we did. We made a few physical changes to the building and in the atrium to allow that space for people to adopt social distancing. We didn't adopt one-way systems around the main part of the building. We opted for a stop and yield protocol, because we felt that if people could interact, so most people would get on the tube and they could manage to do it on the tube, you know, and in their day-to-day lives, and to expect people not to have that already built into them would have been wrong. So we just played on that and encouraged people to continue that social contact that they have between them. So yeah, it's worked very well, I have to say, and we've had some fantastic feedback on social media about how people have felt comfortable.
That's really positive. We've had a quite interesting audience question come in from Craig Wilkinson. He's asking how you found ways to ensure the museum and experience hadn't become sterilised and was still engaging for visitors.
So I think the experience itself was really kind of beyond just the masks. I think for us, I mean, that's a good question actually, Craig. It remained engaging through the content. It was really the content managed to cross over the boundaries of people having to wear a face covering. It was very much a visual and an oral experience. We looked at how we walked the journey ourselves, and making sure that, and as I said earlier, if you walk a building, you can understand what's going on, and if you can walk a mile in somebody's shoes, you can understand their experience. So for us, it was really to ensure that we did enough, but we didn't put in constraints that made it feel that you were removed from that first-hand experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When we looked at what PPE we expected people to have, or what PPE we were going to give to our staff, we wanted to make sure that we didn't put too many boundaries between us and the public. So
it's a tricky balancing act, isn't it? I think.
I hope that goes some way to answering the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
COVID itself has been an accelerator for many of the trends that we've seen in the workplace over the past decade or more. And we talked a little bit about this earlier this week. How has that manifested itself in your particular world?
So I think one of the biggest impacts I've seen is the reduction of carbon footprint. We have proactively engaged in reducing our carbon footprint as much as we can, and through some of the initiatives we've implemented here, we've managed to reduce our carbon footprint by a third year on year. But there was a even bigger reduction in our footprint this year. So we're required to report through to the Lottery Heritage Fund and through Julie's Bicycle our footprint, and I saw a huge decrease. So that's been a really nice downward trend. But in terms of other trends, I've seen the digital tools, which I think have always been available, are now playing a bigger part in day-to-day life. I have seen an upswing when colleagues come into the office. So I noticed there's now, when they see their colleagues, there's a sort of a real excitement when they see people face to face, you know,
Yeah.
and that really makes a difference. It's regardless of what the digital world can and do, and I mean, let's be honest, I think what it can do is quite remarkable. But for me, what I've seen is the realization of the face to face contact wins for me, and I think that's also a big win for FM. I think, you know, noticing that the value in the workplace has increased exponentially, and the role that the services teams do has played a bigger part, and that recognition is there more, I think, than it has been in recent years.
Okay. What do you think the next 10 years holds for the workplace? I think back maybe 5, 6, 7+ years ago, I was writing articles about what the workplace is going to be like in 2020. Of course, we had no idea that this was going to happen in 2020. But let's fast forward to 2030. Will we ever go back to where we were in, say, January this year, or have we really seen a fundamental long-term shift in how people use, or organisations use, workplaces?
I'm going to use the word you used a moment ago. I think there's a balance, and I think we'll see a partial return. I think we're going to see and I predict a continued change towards a more flexible workspace. This is something that decouples people from the desk, something that embraces activity-based working and design thinking. I think in the next, probably fast forward 5 years or maybe sooner, I believe that there is space in the C-suite for a chief workplace officer role. I'd like to see that come about. If you look at the top 5 spend of what any organization does and has, you'll always find people and property. You can't decouple them completely. And I think embracing that and making positive changes towards real world value is going to happen in the next 10 years. It's things, for example, small changes that we can do, taking the sort of the Japanese approach of Kaizen in small changes over a long period of time, make a significant change, can have an impact on productivity, you know, both locally and globally. I think we're going to see a lot of reduction of the work about work, the things that you do that are sit around the task. This is going to be enabling people to focus on output, where there are things where the built environment doesn't always lend itself to that kind of output. I touched on it earlier in that I've seen a swing recently in the last probably 3 years, and I can see that growing, where work would creep into your personal life, and that was typically what you would see 15 years ago, but now it's completely flipped, and I see the socially connected generations flip it on the other way around. So their social life crept into work. So people aren't sitting at their desk until 7:30 because they've got a huge amount of workload and they have to get it out before they can then, you know, go home and leave their work on their desk. It's quite the other way around. You know, they're waiting for the social spaces and connecting with people through their digital tools. I mean, so ultimately, people are at the end of what we do, whilst the medium in which we trade is the physical environment, but it's colleagues, customers that are impacted through all of this, ensuring, and I think we're going to see that we'll ensure that the workplace is more than just a place to hide from the weather and a place to gather. It's a place which will, I think, nurture people and help them grow. That has all of the positive follow-on effects in terms of attracting the best talent, keeping the best talent, you know, and people are going to look for more than just am I employed. It takes you up your value chain, and I think it's an idea to sort of complement this approach with the business. You know, the drivers of most businesses is, and I would always advocate this, the main driver of a business is to make money so you can pay salaries and then you can keep all your stakeholders happy. To do this, it's vital that you support the people that do the work and carry the work for you, and all of our customers. And I think we've spoken about this throughout this webinar, and supporting staff in the right way very quickly translates into an upswing in productivity. A happy worker is a productive worker, and this way we can keep the more money orientated functions, the board and the stakeholders and the shareholders, happier. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that if you keep people, if you look after the people, then the people will look after the business. And I think we're going to see a bigger shift towards the importance of that.
You talked earlier briefly about how when you reopen the Science Museum, the Design Museum, we moved from 120 people to 60 people capacity. We've had a question come in from Hugh Alcott Green, who's asking, do you think COVID-19 has accelerated a move away from using buildings to cram people together for an experience, and towards limiting the access of people, but with an increased focus on what that experience is? And if so, is that part of a long-term trend?
I think that's a very smart thing to say, and yes, that is a long-term trend. I think we are absolutely going to focus on the experiential. This is something I'm seeing in the retail sector. Colleagues who are in the retail sector, we're seeing things shift towards a better experiential economy than we are just cramming people in. You know, I mean, nobody I know ever really enjoyed it unless it's a nightclub, or potentially you're at the football ground and everybody's celebrating and cheering for the same thing. But in probably 80% of your experiences and the things you do, being crammed into the tube and this sort of thing, I mean, really isn't great. So focusing on the experiential piece, yes, we will see that continue to move forward, and I think it will pay dividends in the long run. Absolutely will.
You're clearly working in the Design Museum at the moment. Chris Rowe has asked, how has your commute changed over the past 6 months?
Okay, so it's got longer. I mean, it's just it's a bit weird. So when we first went into lockdown and there was a lot of uncertainty, I hopped in the car. Whilst most people were at home, my commute became 11 minutes long, and I thought I'd reached the nirvana. But then as things changed and things developed, and more people came back to work, and the switch happened, I went back on the public transport, and I think the commute now, it has improved. The flexibility of when people come to work, not everybody is coming between that sort of 1.5 hour sandwich gap, you know, in that, you know, you now, I've noticed that the commute has been spread over a longer period of time. Employers are allowing people to come to work a little bit later, and change when they arrive in the office. This is sort of feeding into with the digital tools and how we're going to see the workplace change. So I quite like my commute. I think it's important to maintain a commute. It's important to have that decompression and the compression. So when you're going into work, it's a very vital 30 minutes to an hour for most people, where you can just wake up a little bit more, get your head into what you need to do, remember the things that you didn't do yesterday and promise that you're going to tick off your to-do list today. And then when you're leaving work, because when I worked at Land Security Trillium, I was a home-based worker. We were one of the very early parts of that. Anyway, so I just conscious of time that the commute, I think, is a vital part of your day, and it's better than it was, and I can do it in about 2/3 of the time I used to. So yeah, less people. There's quite a lot of space on the tube.
That's positive. I think we've got time to squeeze in one more question, which is from Paul Ackhurst, which is, do you see the COVID-19 recession creating opportunities to enhance the workplace, or an opportunity to squeeze the workforce, and why?
I think I'm going to take that in two components. Yes, I do think it's a chance to enhance the workplace. It's become one of the #1 agenda items in any board meeting, and whilst we as a professional industry have the opportunity to have a voice at the top of the agenda, we need to maximize this and utilize it. And whilst not everything we want to achieve will be adopted, I think it's important to get the weighting on that and keep that conversation going. And you know, as I said earlier, I think it's important that the CWO role gets going and that comes about. Will it squeeze the workforce? That's a tough one. I think you'd have to look at the operations heads for each department. I think some businesses haven't got a choice, and they have to work to, you know, use their core team and rebuild from probably Q1 2021 onwards. You know, this is now a case of getting through until sort of April, June 2021, and then they will see a rebuild. So yeah, I think there is going to be a mini squeeze at the moment, and I encourage anybody out there who has a life change impact from this just to take this as an opportunity to look at yourself, what you want, and move forward. If this is the time for change, make it a positive change.
Okay, thanks, Brian. That was really insightful. Really appreciate your comments there, and thank you to the audience for some great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. As I said, we hope to run more of these kind of one-to-one interviews. So if you run a major site in the capital and will be interested in taking part, then please do get in touch. My email address is on the community section of the IWFM website. We're also planning as a region to have a monthly kind of day in the life blog, which is going to be published on our LinkedIn page. So I can urge you to follow that. If you just go onto LinkedIn and search for IWFM London region, then you can follow us there. I think there's also quite a lot of information on the IWFM website. So if you want to check that out, Insight Hub, there's a lot of information and support for FM professionals through COVID and on other topics as well, because we do talk about other stuff apart from COVID, but plenty of resources there. But all I can do is say thank you very much to Brian for joining us today, and thank you to our audience, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy.